Welcome to the Recruiter Startup Podcast. My name's Dualta, and in this podcast series, I will be interviewing investors, advisors, entrepreneurs, and recruiters who are based all over the world, and we will be discussing how to set up, scale, and operate a world-class recruitment company. Today, I'm speaking to James Hickman. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Aquis. The main brand that you may know him from is Aquis Search, where he's the Managing Director of that. They also have a few other sub-brands within the portfolio, covering banking, finance, technology across a large part of Asia. So headquarters in Hong Kong and in Singapore, but also they have a couple of offices in China. So he grew up in Hong Kong and as an expat from an English family, went to university in Australia, fell into the industry for a few years, then set up with his co-founder and has gone from strength to strength. So they've got about 150 people working for them at the moment, and really great business. Really interesting getting into the detail. A couple of key points was how they're a supercharged boutique firm. That's how they view themselves. So they're not executive search. They're definitely mainly contingent, but probably just that next step up from the likes of the way that Walters and Page and those guys operate. And one of the things that they do that I really like, well, a couple of things. First one is they pair their consultants with an administration assistant. And I know some big firms do this, but not as well as this. And he described their process of that and how that frees up the consultants to make more money. And it's something I do myself here, so I know it works. So really thought that was great. Also, I like that he's tried to create a corporate culture and sub-brands within the main company. So it sounds like each sub-brand has a bit of a life of its own. And how he described that, which I thought was really good, was he didn't want it to take on a cult of personality of the owners. Now, that's really important, because if you ever exit your business and you sell it, then it's important that that business can run independently of you. And when people are looking to buy businesses, that there is one of the key things that they put into it. So really great interview, and love getting to speak to people like James and figuring out what a chief executive officer of a scalable recruitment company does on a weekly basis. So hope you've enjoyed this. I enjoyed recording it. And over to James. James Hickman, how are you today?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
I am wonderful. And I have to apologize because we rescheduled this a couple of times. My life has been in complete flux these last...
A couple?
Yeah. We've got renovations happening. We've 2 kids under 2. Everything's very hectic right now. But
mate, I'm way past that now. I think my daughter turned 10 recently, and my youngest is 8. So good luck to you.
You're a proper grown-up now then. Okay.
Possibly.
What? But you're around my age, aren't you, James? What age are you?
I'm 42.
You're 42. Oh, right. Okay. You are
You're
older.
not 42, are you?
No, I'm not. I'm 35 coming 12. So, look, thanks very much for coming on. I've given everybody a brief rundown of your background. But I wanted to get you on, maybe to give us an insight into the Asian market, what it's like being an expat there. Tell us a little bit about your business, your time in Australia, and how you got into the industry. So if you could maybe jump us into where it all began, that would be great.
Wow, that's the big question. How do you fall into recruitment, right? So I'm a Hong Konger. I'm a Brit, but I was born and brought up in Hong Kong and did the expat thing, boarding schools and unis all over the place. And when I returned to Hong Kong, I took a English teaching course because I thought, you know what, I don't know what I want to do. I'll teach English and earn a bit of money as I travel around Asia. What I ended up doing was working for financial services firms and, places like the Securities and Futures Commission as a soft skills trainer, doing presentation and soft skills courses. And because I was in financial services, a friend of mine said, why don't you, come and join me as a recruiter? You'll make more money speaking to the same people about different things. And I joined my first firm as a generalist researcher covering front office, investment banking, asset management, and private banking. And I moved up through the ranks fairly quickly there, and in the end focused on equity research, sales and trading, and built that firm a small derivatives book way back when derivatives were newer, I guess, and did fairly well from there. Moved on to a fully retained house where I covered ECM, M&A, and private equity. But at that stage I went full circle as well, because I decided I wanted to be in more control of what I was doing and run my own desk, and I reverted back to some of my sort of legal education, which had started when I was at uni in Sydney and finished when I was at uni in London. And so I set up the risk and compliance desk for a global legal boutique. In all three jobs I had at that stage, I'd built a derivatives book and revamped an ECM book and then set up a risk and compliance desk. And so at that point I thought, you know what, I can do this myself, and jumped into running my own firm.
Let's digress a little bit there. So you speak Chinese, right?
My spoken Mandarin is terrible, and my spoken Cantonese is terrible. I've done loads and loads of Asian studies, but languages aren't my forte. So I'm like in a restaurant, taxi driver, swearing at people type of level, rather than the fluency that you think I have, probably.
Yeah. And so, from an identity standpoint, you strike me as somebody who's kind of English, kind of Asian, kind of got a bit of an Aussie twang there. What do you see yourself as?
I'm a Hong Konger,
yeah.
Right? I'm a Hong Konger through and through. So I am a Brit. I have a British passport, but I'm a Hong Konger with right of abode. And I view Hong Kong as my home, even though I'm living in Singapore now and have been here for the last 3 years. It's definitely home.
And when you speak to people who are from Hong Kong who aren't from an expat family, do they view you in the same way, or do they kind of think, you're just a Brit?
I don't know. That's a really hard question. Expat communities can be funny places. The second question after what do you do is often how long have you been here, right? And there's a bit of an arms race around that. If you've only been in a certain location for a short time, you're not as credible. I don't think it matters, to be honest. I've got a lot of friends in places like Beijing and Shanghai and Singapore and Hong Kong who turn up, and because they're new to the location and the cities, they give it a better go than the guys who've been hanging around for a long time. They see it with fresh eyes.
Yeah, I mean, lots of our clients go for expats because of that, and because when people take themselves out of their comfort zone, they have to perform to survive.
Yeah, I mean, having said that, we as a firm, we do try and hire locals in the locality. I think there's a barrier to entry in China if you don't speak fluent business level Mandarin. You're at an advantage in Hong Kong if you do speak fluent Cantonese as well, because you can open up local markets in a different way. Singapore's a lot easier, I think, because everyone speaks English here, and I think that's why there's a lot of Aussies and Brits here, even compared to Hong Kong.
What year was it that you got into recruitment?
God, I can't remember. I left uni when I was 22. I had 6-7 years in company training. So I was fairly late. I was about 27, 8. I was 28.
Yeah, I was 27.
Yeah. And actually, at that point, I had to work harder. I mean, truthfully, I'd been running my own business as a sole proprietor, doing the training. But, you join an industry at 27, 28 when, at a level when most people are, in 22, 20, 23, 24, 25. So
you don't get a free swing at it anymore.
No, no. So yeah, I've been doing it for about 15 years, and actually I've been running my own business for 10 of that, based on the fact that I think I'm more of a self-starter.
So let's jump into that piece. So you were 5 years in the industry. Within that time, you worked for 3 different people, and it sounded like you were constantly working on the new thing, like setting up a new desk, setting up a new discipline, constantly looking for that. Do you think that's the entrepreneur in you that was always going to lead you to setting up your own business?
Within 3 weeks of joining the first firm, I knew that I wanted to set up my own firm. I looked at a legal guy who was just, knocking back these fees every other week, and I thought that was the way to go. But it was also a churn and burn firm. If you didn't bill, you got fired, and they tended to put people head to head, really old school. So there was a lot of fear factor there as well. You just had to work your guts out, and on the phones every day, and just smashing it. And so in the first firm, I think it was survival, and moving into a new space was about survival as well. You had blue sky. You didn't have people treading on your toes, and it was a good time to be in equities, in equity research particularly, but sales and trading and then derivatives were developing in Asia. So I was lucky with the timing. It was semi-retained contingent, so I got a good mix of both, styles, I guess. But I moved to a 100% retained shop where, again, I found that I was working really, really hard for some very senior guys, actually, and they really polished me up at that point. So I went from being a bit scruffy to very, very polished, and dealing with senior bankers at the very highest level.
Can I ask you what that means? But
wow.
What does that mean, being like scruffy to polished, in terms of?
Well,
is it how you ask questions? Is it?
I think when you're in a very contingent environment, it can be very, very transactional, because there's a lot of pressure, and what a lot of people don't want to admit is you get what you pay for. So if you don't pay for research, you get a transactional service a lot of the time. And, in a contingent environment, you're constantly trying to, knock back those runs. So, I was someone who could make a lot of money, but I wasn't producing the service levels I did in the second job. In the second job, it was 100% retained. We didn't do anything not even a pitch book unless someone had put a retainer fee down. And, we were in an environment where we were looking at, 50 grand US retainers back in the day, and, and when you're dealing with that level of seniority, they expect a proper, your client expects a proper, consultancy approach, and you really need to know your stuff. So, I was producing these pitch books. Some weeks I'd write 5 pitch books, and we'd be revamping these pitch books all the time. I guess I look at that in a sort of nostalgic way, because I think there is a right and a wrong way to do things, but the market after the GFCs just moved in a completely different way as well. So
yeah, and we'll jump into that. Were you a business owner in the GFC?
Yeah, I was. So I moved to my third firm, set up the risk and compliance desk, and genuinely felt that I knew the market better than the global firm that I was with. And I've been speaking to Scott Harrison, my business partner, for quite some time about setting up together, and he was at another legal competitor. The compliance guys, who back then often came from finance backgrounds, were feeding back to me how their sales and trading platforms were doing, and they were looking for new roles because a lot of the banks weren't doing that well in 2008. So I said to Scott, look, if we're going to do it, we've got to do it soon, otherwise we're going to miss this market entirely. And in fact, we did miss that market entirely. We both resigned about 2 weeks before Lehman's went bankrupt, and sat out of the market for 3 months on our gardening leave, and started in January 2009. So wow. We were right at the bottom of the GFC.
And how did that relationship come about? Like there's a lot of trust that has. Were you friends?
Well, Scott and I, of course, get on. We've been business partners for 10 years, and I've known him for about 15, something like that. We were introduced at a party through a local friend in Hong Kong who I'd played mini rugby with growing up, and we were all in legal recruitment at the time. And so we just started... I tell a lie, we weren't all in legal recruitment at the time. They were in legal recruitment at the time, and I was in sell-side equity research, sales and trading. But we just started talking, and we realized we had a rapport around work. And over the next few years, we just built up that rapport until we were confident that we could work with each other. In the year before we set up Aquis, we probably spoke about setting up the business every week and met every couple of weeks, just to make sure that we were okay with each other.
And when you're putting this strategic plan together of who you want to be, you work for a large contingent firm. You work for a fully retained service. So what did you bring from each? At that moment, what were you bringing, and did that turn out to be the business that you were structuring further down the road?
However you write the business plan, it never turns out like that. That's the secret of most entrepreneurs. You have to be flexible. Scott and I weren't really dealing with business planning in the way that we do now in any way, shape or form. We were just getting to know each other and asking each other a lot of questions and talking through our problems with our previous firms and how we would want to change things, and asking each other how to deal with certain issues. And so for us, it was just about rapport. It wasn't about planning. We just needed to be confident that we could get on with each other, and we're both pretty hard workers. So that was the first thing. You got to have a high IQ and a high EQ, but if you've got those things and you don't turn up, you've got nothing. So Scott and I, would have conversations at 10:30 at night as we were going home. From work, the year before that we set up the business, and we were really driving each other to work harder and harder and harder and do better and better and better, and it's worked.
So those early years, was it just you and him in a serviced office? Did you throw a bunch of money at it? Did you know that it was going to turn into this scalable business model?
Bravado and naivety was probably where we were at. When you ask about business plan, I think we were naive in setting up the business when we did, because no one really understood, the ramifications of the global financial crisis at that time. So we went in completely blind. We did have a conversation at one stage where I was sitting on a beach in Perth in Western Australia, and he's a Sydney sider, so he was down in Sydney, and I was like, mate, have you seen what's going on the TV? And he said, well, I used to be an organizational psychologist, and I'm not going back to that. And I said, well, I used to be a trainer, and I'm not going back to that. So recruitment's all we've got. You
were all in.
Yeah, forge ahead. And truthfully, this is where things, line up a little bit, because both of us had made a little bit of money on the property market in Hong Kong because it had been good years. And so we had a little bit of a cushion. We put in some money, not as much as people assume you need, and just started working hard. By the end of the first year, we were 10 people. And I've literally done the startup thing where you pull out a wardrobe and put in a desk, and people are hot desking on computers because we haven't got enough PCs in the office and stuff like that. Real sort of highly charged environment. But we went from 10 to 20 to 30 in 3 years.
All from organic funding.
All from organic funding, yeah. I mean, we made our first placement in about a month, a very small one, and then we made our first large one in about 2 months or something like that. Again, compliance search, when the compliance build out started, and I think by the end of the first year, we'd made more money than either of us ever had. But we didn't know what to do with it either. So we just kept doing more of the same. We had quite a large treasury by the end of the 3 years, because, we were aware that people can spend money as fast as they can make it. And in fact, in the first year, Scott and I didn't take a salary and didn't take any commissions either. No bonus, no nothing. We lived off our own backs at that point. In the second year, I think we gave ourselves a salary of about 50,000 Hong Kong dollars each, but no bonus. Again, we left the money in the business. And at the end of the third year, I don't think we gave ourselves bonus again, but we increased the salary. The bonus I gave myself at the end of the third year was a big beef-eater barbecue that I bought that was quite expensive, but that was it. We were quite frugal. But again, we'd opened Singapore and Shanghai in that time. And it was a bit early. In the third year, we opened 2 offices at the same time. And,
that's crazy.
It was. It was completely crazy. By the end of the fourth year, we had, Singapore, Shanghai, Beijing, but as well as Hong Kong. But we were running a completely different model to where we are now. Back then, it was definitely hub and spoke. We had about 25 guys in Hong Kong, and then we'd have between 2 and 5 in the other locations, because all we were running was legal, risk, compliance, and finance. So it was pure, it went from legal and compliance to adding risk, and then, adding finance and calling it corporate governance. And it's what people wanted at the time.
How has that market changed in recent years? There seems to be more and more competitors in the market. It seems like you got a good footing right after the GFC.
It's changed unbelievably. I think recruitment in general has changed unbelievably in the last 10 years. I speak to a lot of guys about their technology at the moment. I'm interested in different CMS systems. I'm interested in pipelining online. I'm interested in apps and all that sort of stuff. So, I think fundamentally the structures of hiring and talent acquisition have changed. There's a huge amount of layering within most organizations between the agency and talent acquisition and RPO, the HR themselves, the hiring managers. Everybody's using a different technology to attract people. So when it comes down to actual functions, I don't think so deeply about it anymore. I think in year 5, I was very much aware that many of our competitors had caught up in the compliance stakes, particularly. I think legal's a much higher barrier to entry, and where I think currently the largest legal and compliance search firm by headcount in Asia, we're bigger than the biggest boutiques in Asia on that side of things. So we're doing pretty well, but I was placing heads of compliance and heads of product desks in investment banks every other month in the first 3 to 4 years, and they were big ticket fees. But I think there was a lot of AML, KYC, CDD requirements that came into the market, and that became more volume. And so the seniority, again, once the senior placements have been made, moved down, and then you're looking at the mid back office type compliance roles as well, and there's been huge volume over the years, but it's a different type of requirement in terms of the recruitment model. We were very much more searchy in the early years, and we're now more recruitment.
Are you somewhere in between, would you say?
Yeah, look, we are a hybrid. A lot of firms talk about contingent fee structure within a retained model. Most of those firms don't work a retained model at all. We have what I would call a supercharged contingent model, where about 1/3 of the business supports the other 2/3 in revenue generation, where we've been able to take some risks because we're owner managers, and we have a large operation in Mumbai, and we've BPO'd there using a shared services platform called Arbor Services. And those guys do admin, ops, marketing, finance, tech, HR for us, and they're about 20-ish in Mumbai doing that. We've got another hub for Arbor in Hong Kong as well. There are about 10 there.
So in real terms for a recruiter, what that means is that you're taking away a lot of the heavy lifting from what potentially people do at some firms. So then they're able to concentrate on the high ticket generation of candidates, clients, making calls and that.
This is it. Very early on, part of the ethos was an understanding that we didn't want consultants doing any administration. So our consultants generally don't arrange their interviews. Their personal assistants do. They don't reg their candidates. The research does. and the list goes on. Think of anything that's not to do with calling a client or a candidate, and our support teams are doing it.
I run the exact same model. So, yeah,
we also have a research platform called Research for Search. So there's about right now I think there are about 17 guys supporting the consultants as well, and it's about ratios, right? If you go to a purer recruitment company, you'll find maybe one administrator to between 9 and 12 consultants, something like that. Right now for us it's 1 to 6, and with research, if you have it, you know, the ratios vary, but right now for us it's 1 to 3 or 4 consultants. So you know, our guys really get what they, you know, what they need. And I genuinely think we're a firm that supports our consultants, you know, more than others.
Yeah, you can drown in administration. I remember when I worked for Robert Walters, the amount of administration I would have to do, or I would just refuse to do, it just blew my mind. And I think when I set up my own business, I documented everything that I could possibly do in a day, and said, okay, well, which of these doesn't require my own influence? And that was client calls, candidate calls, but everything else can be done by your assistants.
Yeah, well, you know, we're not a KPI shop at all, right? So we don't do any of that sort of measurement. We barely even do targets. I like to think that people are working as hard as they can because they want to earn as much money as they can. But
how do you bring in graduates without having set targets and set measurement tools?
Well, we generally have only taken graduates in Hong Kong because it's the largest office, and because of the price point in India, we don't need to take graduates on. So, you know, we have about 50 people in Mumbai and about 35 in Hong Kong. So
wow.
in Hong Kong, it's just a case of wading through, you know, lots of CVs and finding the right fit. And most of our grads over the years have come from good universities in Australia or the UK. So we've got grads who have, you know, LSE, Oxford, UCL, Monash. And so, you know, these are intelligent people who don't necessarily need the carrot and stick routine.
Okay. All right. And so talk to me about what it's like for recruiters who come over from the UK or Australia and they go to Hong Kong or Singapore. What would be the core differences in the lifestyle of those two locations? What are some of the pitfalls that they can fall into? Just kind of walk us through what that looks like for people.
Well, for me, there's the first assumption that all of these places are similar, right? So the first pitfall is assuming that because you can recruit well in Sydney or London, that you can recruit well in Singapore or Hong Kong. Hong Kong, Singapore, Beijing, Shanghai, Sydney, London, they're all completely different markets with completely different dynamics that require an individual to build relationships in different ways. So, you know, I think only the foolhardy rest on their laurels, and it's a huge learning curve. When we're moving people cross-border, we tend to tell them, you know, if you're moving location, you don't want to necessarily move company or move functional coverage. So, you know, if you're sitting at Hayes in London and you want to get to Hayes in Singapore, frankly, your best bet is to go internally because you'll have a softer landing. And I genuinely think, you know, that's the right way to go for most people. In most of these places, and you should probably throw Dubai in there, the lifestyle is just completely different. You know, you've got the sun and the sea, low tax environment. I think people tend to work hard, play hard a little bit more. Lots of my London friends will say that's not true, but I think when you've got a little bit more cash in your back pocket, you tend to spend a little bit more as well. And so, if you're in a place like Singapore, getting around Thailand and Malaysia and Indonesia, and the rest of Southeast Asia is often what it's about. So it is about the lifestyle. And go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned that there were some unique specifics to each market. Now, I have a little bit of an idea on that, but could you elaborate? What?
Okay.
Yeah. What is it that recruiters would have to do differently in each market to build relationships?
Well, I'll go to home base in Hong Kong and say that, that market tends to be a lot more aggressive, especially in financial services. So even compared to London, I would say that, you have to be a little bit more hard-nosed in Hong Kong. I think it's more comparable in financial services to New York per se, and it really is a financial services hub. If you want to work in financial services in Asia, and you don't speak Japanese, Hong Kong is really, for me, the only place to be. There's plenty going on in Singapore and Shanghai, but I think in Singapore, it's much more relationship driven. It's a much softer approach. Frankly speaking, the roles here tend to be a little bit more junior, and the compensation tends to be a little bit lower than Hong Kong. But I think you're allowed to build up stronger relationships in Singapore with your clients than sometimes you do in Hong Kong, which can be a little bit more transactional.
Sounds a lot like New York, Hong Kong.
I think so. I mean, I've never worked in New York, but when I've spoken to people about it, and the US in general, I think it's a little bit more transactional at times. But again, I'm talking specifically about financial services and commerce and industry, which is another segment we cover, is a lot different. We have some very good Chinese consultants who are running regional search based on their relationships out of Shanghai. I think they're very, very reactive at all levels. I think in Shanghai, you build that relationship and you do as much as you can, excuse me, for that particular client. So the model is very different. In Hong Kong, we're very much functionally split, but in Shanghai, we have headhunters focused on, the pharma industry or tech industry, automotive, and they'll do a mixture of things within the industry splits, instead of just saying, I am a finance accounting recruiter or something like that.
Why is that?
Well, I think largely it's actually a very saturated and quite competitive market in China. We have 2 offices in China, and we're talking about going to Chengdu as well. Different organizations have approached China in different ways, but about, I guess, maybe 5-6 years ago, the big global brand names, Hudson, Michael Page, Robert Walters, those guys turned up, and they were really looking for market share. So a lot of these firms grew to plus 150 in a couple of years. And when you develop a business like that, essentially you're overbroking the market. And so there are a lot of low-level, low-billing recruiters who, were doing between 500 and 1 million RMB. And, still in those markets, 1.2 million RMB is a pretty decent annual revenue target. But essentially, I think it educated the market there in terms of the agencies in the wrong way. So these guys built up industry streams, and so they expect industry streams. So you have your senior tech originator who will technology originator, as in the industry, who will bring in legal, risk, compliance, finance, technical roles, engineering, what have you, to the team. And the guys grow up expecting to do a mix of different things. I've always been a specialist. Frankly, I'd be fairly uncomfortable if I was working that way, because everything is fairly new to you.
Yeah, and one candidate can't be good for multiple clients.
Yeah, but again, it's not a searchy market a lot of the time, because there's a high, number of people in the market. So it's a, I couldn't tell you now, but when I last looked, I think there were 30 million people in Shanghai or greater.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Greater Shanghai metropolis, yeah.
What your chief executive officer? What does that kind of mean in terms of the work that you're doing throughout the week? Are you flying to different places quite often? Are you in touch with, are you managing a bunch of directors, or what does your week look like when you get to this level?
It looks different every week, is the truth, and it looks different every day. I joke sometimes that I used to be a headhunter, then I became a recruiter, and now I'm an accountant. You get the gist of that. No, on the travel, I actually try and limit my travel for personal reasons. I think next year I'll probably travel about, 20-25% of the time. We have quite a wide footprint. And I tend to travel to London and Mumbai and Delhi and then Hong Kong. I don't do as much travel to Shanghai and Beijing and Taipei for us. So, travel's a bit of fun. I enjoy that. I particularly enjoy going to Mumbai. I always have a good time there. And, a change is as good as a holiday as well. So if you change it up, you tend to get refreshed. But in terms of the day-to-day, in terms of reports, as we expand, I'm constantly restructuring and trying to limit reports. I probably have about 8 people, or maybe more. It might be as many as 12 that report in directly to me and Scott for different things. And I probably, I look for the day when there are maybe between 6 and 8. So I'm often, part of my day is to try and find other people to do the job. If I can't delegate the job, I actually go out to hire for it.
Yeah, I've noticed you took on a regional COO recently. Was that with the mind of taking a lot of stuff off your desk?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Matt Whitman joined us in Hong Kong about 4 months ago now. And he's been doing a fantastic job at particularly getting involved in hiring, because we feel like we're going into high growth mode, and we meet a lot of recruiters. And that takes up a huge amount of my time, to be fair. So, Matt's helping out with that, but he's, taking on a lot of the travel as well from Scott. He travels a lot to Beijing and Shanghai particularly. And, what we try to do is, take the best of other models and support our guys as much as possible. So, we do have senior HR and, IT desk support and all that sort of stuff. And, we probably have more support than, as I said before, than most firms that are our size. So, that should alleviate the day for me. deal with a lot of finance stuff, not so much IT. It's not my forte. Marketing stuff, HR stuff, and I think HR stuff is the stuff that I'm really much more focused on at the moment. Corporate culture is a big thing. You get to 50 people, and a firm starts to take on a life of its own, and you go over 100 in it, and you really have to have your mission statements and values in line, and you need your infrastructure as well in terms of handbooks and your go-tos, so that people know what they are and aren't allowed to do in certain situations. And
so that's an exciting time. So you're at the 50 mark. Are you, if you could vision the next 4 or 5 years, do you see yourself getting to the 100 mark? Where do you see the greatest opportunity?
Well, you're talking to me as Aquis in that sort of mindset, where we have about 65 people within Aquis, but adding all the other businesses together, right now we've got about 120.
Wow.
And by the end of the year, it'll be closer to 130. So we've already got there. It's a little bit veiled because we have 8 different brand names, and we're just trying things out in different ways. We have an IT search firm called Click2. There are 15 guys there. And one thing, talking about corporate culture, is each of these businesses has a slightly different view of the world because they're doing slightly different jobs. Everybody's in recruitment-esque industries, but the Click2 guys in India are all algorithmic trading specialists. They do quants research and everything from applications development through quants research and IT and all that stuff through to trading. And they love that. They're placing people all over the world. But it's not a model that would work for Aquis. So, they work in different ways. I think the guys in Aquis in Hong Kong going off to Macau for their Christmas offsite, and we just try and do what people want. In a
lot of
sense.
moving parts, eh?
Yeah, well, it is a lot of moving parts, but you don't want a personality cult. The second firm I worked in, which was a great firm, was a personality cult, and when that person sold and left the company, the company did not do well for a few years until the new owner, developed her own systems and processes. So we want people to take on their own, needs and wants and develop their own corporate culture. So we're working on that.
Fantastic. Well, James, I know you're really busy, so thank you so much for coming on and telling us all about the company and your journey. And really appreciate your time. Sounds like you've got an awesome business.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Take care.
You too. Bye.
Well, massive thank you to James for coming on the podcast and giving us an insight into the different markets there. Great opportunity for anybody who fancies getting out there and getting a start in recruitment in the Asian markets. Usually fees are higher, tax savings greater, and if you're in a candidate short market, you're really on to a winner. So yeah, if you're interested in doing that, reach out to James directly or contact me or one of my team, and we can walk you through all our clients across Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo, and China. All right, so that is it for this week. Massive thank you to James again, and thank you to all of you for listening. Take care. See you next time.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.